It's time to grow up.
Hi guys, it's Robbie Starbuck. Welcome to Grow Up. Today we have an amazing guest, Rachel Bock. She's a biologist that you may have seen recently on Twitter because she had an amazing thread on feminism. And we wanted to delve into that and ask her some questions to see what her expertise, in terms of her career and how she's had that transfer over to her personal life and where she's at now. So, hi Rachel.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. If you could tell the audience a little bit about your experience as, you grew up and what you majored in and sort of the path that you've been led on. Give them a little bit of background on your story.
I grew up in a very liberal and progressive household, and I considered myself a feminist at a very young age. So before I really could conceptualize what that was, I always thought that it was that men and women were equal, and so that we'd have equal opportunities. And so that was the framework that I was operating under. I was pushed pretty heavily into the career path, and the concepts of women being high achieving and breaking that glass ceiling and being strong and independent and not needing to rely on anybody else were concepts that were very deeply embedded in the way that I thought about myself and the world. So I studied biology as an undergrad, and in between my undergrad and my master's, I worked various jobs, environmental consulting, field jobs, different education type jobs, and
that's fantastic background.
Yeah, what is the general attitude in the upper echelons of academia towards some women who choose to pursue a different route, like perhaps women who choose to stay at home or choose to be mothers? Is there an attitude of what is the word?
Support for that? I mean, is this something that's generally supported, or is this something that's looked down upon?
Yeah, what is the attitude towards that?
Okay, so I'll try to be as fair as I can for what I noticed. And this is just, of course, my personal observations. But on one hand, there is a push to make things more mother-friendly and family-friendly. So flexibility and allowing some leave and time to spend with kids and things like that. On the other hand, there is the expectation that your work is very important and will be prioritized. And it's kind of funny because even when women were taking leave, they still were expected to be available for research questions or through email. I've also thought of, because it's kind of like they speak out of two sides of their mouth in some ways. So they want a lot of support for women and the differences that they would have and bring to the table, but then also at the same time pushing girls into science with a lot of grant money and programs just dedicated to women. And so there's this paper that came out talking about the leaky pipeline and why women are not found at some very high levels in academia or business or things like that. And what they find is that women make choices that are different than men. They often will pull back. And I've noticed that a lot. So a lot of people that I was in school with, or that I had, that were at higher levels of academia while I was there, they would prioritize their kids as much as they could. And a lot were not taking certain grants or taking certain projects because of prioritizing that time. Now, when you see the statistics on that, it looks like, well, why are we losing these women? We need to make it better so that we don't lose them. But really, they're making choices that are better for their families. And that, for some reason, doesn't seem to give them the statistics that they need to show that, hey, women are now at these high levels. So then they continue pushing programs on girls and continue pushing there, thinking that just more support for them is what they want. When a lot of them make choices to leave or go part-time. I think about this particular person that was in a lab that I was in before me, and after her PhD, she decided she had a baby, and she decided to be a stay-at-home mom for a few years. And another woman remarked, what a waste that was to educate her and to put her through that program, because now she's just staying at home. And in some ways she's kind of right, because it sounds really harsh, because okay, she's making that choice. You could think about it as a waste. But in other ways, she made that choice very okay, I know what I'm getting into if I pursue this other route with my doctorate versus if I stay at home. And she made that choice for her life. But then when we think about it on a societal level, or how much we're spending on educating women in these high levels, when they ultimately will choose to not pursue that career path, and many choose to not.
Right.
Are we wasting a lot of our funding and money on educating people that ultimately make the choice not to go into it? So then I wonder if the push needs to be so hard. Just let everybody make their choices. And I feel like my push was very hard to continue going on. These were people that really wanted to support me, and they very much had my best interest at heart. I don't think that they didn't, but there was a lot of push to, hey, you should go on for a PhD, and you have a lot of value here to give to science and things like that. So that's fine. I just wonder why we're pushing so hard on just girls, because it seems like that's just for statistics and just to be able to hold up a statistic and say, look, now we're all equal, as if we have to be the same in order to be equal. And that's the big thing that I've been piecing out, right? We're not the same. We don't have to be the exact same in everything in order for us to be equal as human beings.
Right.
I think that's a great point. I think, one of the things that we miss when it comes to feminism is we've lost sight of what the original purpose was. The original purpose was, true equality. That means that we were all equal to make the decisions we wanted to make, to get into whatever job we wanted to do, or to be whatever we wanted to be. And I think now feminism has been distorted into this idea that unless you're a working woman and you're able to do it all, and do it all is defined by these sort of far left standards of what all means, and I think that women are looked down upon unless they meet that, far left threshold for what it means. So, that's sort of, it's weird, because if you had told me 10 years ago I'd be sitting here saying that I have no respect for feminism, I wouldn't believe you. But feminism has so radically changed that, I'm sitting here saying I have no respect for the modern feminist movement, because it's so distorted from what the original meaning is. And if anything, I feel like it stands in complete contrast to what it's meant to be. So at this point where we are, do we need a different word? Is it even worth having a different word to be able to sort of accurately define what it means to be a modern, feminine, empowered woman that can sort of, make whatever choice she wants to make, but be free and be respected for whatever that choice is that's best for her life?
I don't know that, I'm not good at coming up with new words, but maybe we do need a new concept. I think the concept is already kind of there. We have the value system in place that people have the same choices. And I think that is a concept that everybody understands. The push to make everybody have equity and the same exact outcomes is something that really has to contest with the biological differences between men and women. And so if you do hold that we are different, which we are, and I don't think really anybody that's really honest can argue that there aren't differences between men and women.
Yeah.
And so once you kind of accept that, you would expect that there would be differences in the choices that we make in our life and the things that interest us and that we end up pursuing. So perhaps maybe we do. One of the things that kind of jolted me and woke me up to the balance that I was missing out on was I was listening to a Jordan Peterson interview, and this was a few years ago. There was quite a bit of evolution before I heard this, but it kind of clicked things into place. I think he was with Kathy Newman. I think it was in that interview, the one that really went viral.
Yep, I know what one you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, and she said something about equality and why don't we see women in these high levels? And he said, well, they could if they want to be, but it just might not be what they want.
Right.
Yep.
That's really kind of...
It's a lot simpler than a lot of people want to make it out to be.
Exactly. So when I thought about myself, and I thought about a lot of friends, because now I'm in my 30s, so I've seen the evolution of really driven women who went to college and had these careers, and when they eventually had kids and a family, a lot of them just went part-time, or they said, I can't handle having this career and raising these 2 or 3 little kids, and I'm going to stay at home with them. And if they had the opportunity to, they were really happy to be able to do that. So I saw it more as choices that people were making and not some system of oppression on them. It was actually the free choices that free people were making to live their life how they wanted to.
Right. It's a crazy concept that a woman choosing to be with her children and raise her children is somehow disempowering or disenfranchising her from her growth and success in something that she studied in her career path.
Exactly. It's really anti-feminine. It's very anti-women, because that what was I thinking about this morning? Right. So if a woman chooses to stay at home and raise her children, she's not seen as worthy to some statistic of women earning as much as men, or having these careers that they can be on the cover of a magazine and show that they're a strong businesswoman. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just that we're not seeing as many positive images of women that are mothers and that are helping their children raise up well. And when you think about what the backbone of society is, it's children that are healthy and happy that can get on with their life in a healthy way. And a lot of that starts, I would argue all of it starts in the home. So if that support isn't there to begin with, then there's a lot of time that it takes for them to release that baggage, so to speak.
Sure. Life is all about choices. And I think that is the feminism that I grew up also embracing, was the idea of equal opportunity, and then, but not equal outcomes. And that's really what I support as far as incorporating, for lack of a better word, of a movement, but incorporating femininity into feminism is really honoring the individual path of whatever the woman chooses. If she chooses to educate herself and then leave to go raise children, that's not seen as a failure in any capacity. It's honoring her path. And likewise, if a woman doesn't want to have children and she wants to just grow with her career and that's her life course and trajectory, that's also wonderful. It's supporting the individual woman.
Well, see, I would argue this. I would actually go a step further, kind of touching on what you said about Jordan Peterson's stance on this. I would say that the reason that we don't see a lot more women in those higher positions that they were referring to is because I would argue women are more innately emotionally intelligent than men. So I feel like women are more likely to find joy in their life than men are. And I think that bears out when you look at how many men commit suicide and you go into like sort of mental health issues and whatnot. Women innately sort of search out joy and understand joy more intensely than men tend to. We tend to be creatures of habit, and we still are very designed to sort of act out our primal instincts to provide provide safety, provide, food, provide all those things. That's something that's just innately in most males, not all males, but most. And I feel like in most women, there's sort of an innate emotional intelligence that most men are not born with. So I think that that's actually why we don't see more women in those positions, is because they know what's going to bring them joy. And for a majority of those women, it's not being in those higher positions. It's having a family, or having a balance.
So I think what you're speaking to is you can see the behavioral manifestation of very real differences in men and women, which is what you're speaking to.
Yes.
There is a very different way that we deal with stress. So women they've recoined what the stress response is for women to tend and befriend. That was actually kind of like 20 years ago now. So rather than fight or flight, we tend and befriend. So in a stressful situation, or when our life is stressful, we're more likely to tend to offspring, tend to making sure things are good with them because we want them to be safe if we're sensing stress. Mm-hmm. So we go to the offspring, nurture them, and befriend, meaning keep your social group and the social cohesion intact, especially with other women, because that is safe for us. We need protection of a group system. So I think what you're speaking to is that when women feel this stressed out part of their life, hey, I'm crazy working, my kids are running around, everything is stressful, they tend to go to, I need to make sure the kids are okay, I need to make sure the social group is okay, and they're much more in tune to that. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that they're more emotionally intelligent about self-care too.
Okay, I need to make this change in my life because this isn't working.
Exactly. So all those things put together, I think, is just a type of intelligence that men don't have, at least is innately, it's not like a natural thing for us. It's something that's sort of more of a learned behavior for most men. I know for me, probably the hardest thing for me to learn in my life was, like the importance of self-care, because it just was not an innate thing. I've always cared more about taking care of the people that I feel like are dependent on me than I have been about taking care of myself. And I think men do that, to a fault more often than women do. And it's something I admire about women that I want to be more like, is, have that balance. It kind of goes back to one of the things I wanted to jump back to too, because I found it really interesting, is you said that a lot of this started as a kid for you, being raised in a family that was, quote, progressive. Would you say as an adult, and you don't have to answer this question if you're not comfortable, but would you say as an adult there's a lot of friction with the people that you grew up with, including family, that are more progressive, once they sort of came to understand what your views have evolved into?
Yeah, I would definitely say the conversation with family and friends has still been evolving.
Yeah.
It's hard to have the conversations because I've done so much growth on my own away from those ideologies that explaining all of it is really tough to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I totally empathize there.
Yeah.
So I've had, I didn't know if you were saying something. Okay. So I've had some conversations in pieces where I've tried explaining why I don't consider myself a feminist anymore, or why the liberal ideology doesn't work for me anymore. But it's sort of in little tidbits. I haven't explained everything fully. Some friends have, I would say I've lost a few friends that were, maybe they misunderstood me in some ways, maybe not, but maybe we just don't line up in some of our ideologies anymore. And so if we are going to consider the social group and how important that is for women, if I'm not aligning with it, then I can see them not wanting to be a part of it with me anymore. But I have also met a lot of people that have seen what I've seen, and that has been really reassuring for me, because I've felt that, am I the only one seeing this? And when I made that thread, I was not expecting it to go as wide as it did. But I had a lot of people reach out to me, not just on the thread, but in private message, saying this resonated with me so much because I grew up thinking that, and now that I'm older, I just want to be home with my kids. Or somebody actually wrote me this really heartfelt message about she doesn't think she would have ever had kids because of how she was raised. Yeah. She was always going to be doing her career, and then she randomly got pregnant, and she's so thankful because it brought her child, and then she blocked me. I think it was just really taboo for her to talk about. Yeah. And a lot of other people have said that there's nobody that they can talk to. So I know a lot of people are feeling that they're the only ones seeing how feminism has not done them well, and it has not done them justice, that as a feminine woman, they really don't feel that they've lived out a path that was innate and true to them. And getting other people to see that, or even saying it out loud, is very taboo. So I think that thread just allowed people to feel that they can say something, either speak out themselves or, at least write me a message. But that is why I will be writing something about this at some point soon, including stories from other women that want to talk about it, whether they're anonymous or not, because I do think that it's something that young girls need to hear. So
definitely. I think that's awesome. I think that's really important work that you're doing to let girls know that ultimately what we should be doing is supporting their own individual path and desire and what's fulfilling to them, not necessarily a statistic marker for how many women we need in STEM, and while at the same time kind of downplaying motherhood or marriage. Because I remember growing up, there was a pressure to go to college, to get your master's. It was just never enough. It felt like it was never enough. And then you add that on to parenthood, and somehow you're supposed to be there's these crazy pressures and unrealistic expectation that a woman is somehow supposed to be a present mom, which is a full-time job. Whether they're in school or not, you're involved in some capacity and involved in their well-being and meeting their needs, and at the same time maintaining this career at the same level as, say, a man or a woman who doesn't have children, who isn't making those choices and sacrifices. It's just completely unrealistic, and I think you're a breath of fresh air to what is real. I mean, we each have our own individual stories. And I think breaking through these false parameters of how it's supposed to look like, whether you choose the path of education and career or motherhood or blend them together. I think that we should be doing a better job of supporting women, and that's the biggest issue I have with feminism as a whole. It's more subservient to a political ideology than it is to embracing and empowering women in their own individual choices.
That's a great way to put it. I am wondering at this point, if you're starting to, I'm assuming that you're starting to come to terms with the fact that old adage about becoming more conservative as you get older and liberalism being attractive when you're young, that's, just an inherently true, adage. But is that sort of like, is that the path for you, that you saw yourself just sort of progressively as you got older, you saw yourself getting more conservative?
I've definitely noticed that with myself. I found that I want to come back to something that you said, Landon, but I will answer that first. So peeling apart feminism was the first layer for me. And after that, it felt that now I can think about the ways that I've thought about everything. And because once you break a paradigm that you've been living in for so long, it just gets more comfortable to, hey, maybe this other thing I've been thinking is the right thing for so long also has some problems. Right. And when feminism left as this amazing ideology from my mind, I also started looking at, well, what do I want? And what do other women want around me? And what does it seem that we're doing when we're actually making our free choices? And I started looking more at some of the traditional roles that are more part of conservatism and keeping the family unit in a really safe space, and making sure that that's elevated. So those have been things that have been very attractive to me. And you can't deny the statistics of that either, that kids growing up in a home that's, has the mother and father there is a really great place for them.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at, well, where do those traditional ideas come from? And so now maybe atheism was wrong. And now I've been reading the Bible and feeling that there's so much freedom there to be true to yourself and be an individual in there that I had never realized before. So there's a lot of things that I'm progressing into as I'm getting older. And I don't know if it's normal, as you said, as you tend to get older, you get more conservative. So maybe this is just a normal progression, or, if it's because you start seeing how those liberal ideologies play out and you just, oh, wait, this is not.
Well, you start to see how it all collapses
Yes.
on itself, and that's I think it goes back to older and wiser, like you truly do get wiser as you get older. And, I think the thing is, when we're young, at least when I was young, I thought that to be nice and good, I had to be liberal. I thought that if I want to take care of people who are sick, and I want people who are homeless to be taken care of, and I want kids who don't, can't go see the doctor to be able to see the doctor. I thought all those things meant I had to be a Democrat.
Right.
And, as I got older, I started to realize that I had been lied to, my entire life, and that all of these things were based on a false premise, that it wasn't one or the other. It was, a set of values were being sort of hidden from me. And you start to realize in education too, there's so many things that I didn't learn in school that I learned afterwards just because I had a curiosity mindset where I was constantly looking into things. And those things that I learned, I was just kind of stunned that I never was taught in school, or that I was told the exact opposite. So I think that that's one of the things about growth is, as we get older, if we keep a curious mindset, we have the opportunity to break down those lies that we sort of really brought in as what would you call them? Like they were imprinted on us as kids, and it takes work to be able to peel those back. And I think touching on something you said, I think was right on, is that first one is the hardest one to break down, because it's so hard to just be able to take down that big wall. But once you take down a section of it and you take that one thing down, it becomes much easier to examine everything you believe and sort of start to, build something that's a stronger foundation based on, what do you really feel? It's no longer just what you feel. It's what do you feel based on the full set of facts?
And you get that. I mean, I'm not wise in any way. I'm just trying to figure it all out like everybody else. But I do feel that when I was younger, I didn't have the perspective of longitudinal studies across so many people in my life. Whereas now, you don't have to have a double-blind study of 1 million people to see how things play out in people's lives and the friends that you have and the choices people make, and see that, hey, this doesn't actually make a whole much sense. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of perspective that provides at least a modicum of wisdom.
Yes, absolutely.
And what's that?
I said absolutely true.
Yeah. So, the first thing to go is the hardest one. So if anybody's listening, it gets easier with time to have a top view of yourself. So when I was actually teaching in university, this was something that I was really keen on having my students think about, which is that I want you to come into this classroom and not be your point of view. I want you to have a top view of all of these different points of view. And so that's something that I had done in my life. And so when I would present different views on something, for example, my environmental studies class, which we had a lot of different views coming in for that. If you maintain that you're up here, you're at 30,000 feet, you can see all of the points of view and not hold and be defensive of one of them. And so I try to do that now with just different ideologies that I think I had held, let me just take a top view and hear different perspectives without feeling that I have to defend one and be in the camp of one of them. And that really allows you to, is there merit there? Do I get what they're saying? Okay, I get the nuance there. And then you actually might become a Venn diagram of different things and not be in a camp.
Right.
So I think that's just an important perspective to have, is just that big view. And you don't have to hold another point of view in order to understand what it is.
Absolutely. 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 And I think that's a really great exercise in empathy too, is to really be able to understand, had you lived a different life from somebody else's shoes, you'd understand why they have those perspectives. And it's not coming from a place of moral supremacy or judgment for why those people believe what they believe. Mm-hmm. So I have a question, regarding abortion. Like, has your views on abortion changed from the perspective of a biologist, but also from the trajectory of being raised in a progressive household to
being a feminist?
Yeah, being a feminist to, now, to the evolution of who you are now. Has that changed at all for you?
I would say so. So growing up, I think I felt very pro-choice. And the ideology of the day was any choice should be just what a woman wants. And if she wants to abort at any time for really any reason, then that should be her option. And I think that misses a big part of the conversation, which is that there are really big psychological effects that women have when they have an abortion. And I don't think it gets airtime. I don't think it gets part of that discussion. So if it is about women's happiness and freedom and all of these concepts that are built into that, then again, seeing that over time, I've seen a lot of people very personally have tremendous psychological effects from having an abortion, from even just an early abortion, right? So it didn't need to be laid on. Miscarriages are very psychologically, those have big effects. And so choosing to do that yourself also does. And I've seen that with a lot of people. And I don't think that gets any airtime, any discussion. And I think it comes back to the sexual revolution and really wanting to have free, casual sex without really having a responsibility to yourself and what that means and how important it is to consider it's not just anything goes and you can have casual sex and there are no responsibilities to it. And you will, besides just the sex itself, which affects you psychologically, there are effects from the abortion that you may end up having and if you do get pregnant, which most of them are from just sex and not rape or incest, which people argue.
Well, they use that because the reason they use that, it needs to be pointed out, the rape and incest, is because they know that the rest is indefensible. And I think that's why they so often go to those 2 points, because they don't have a really great defense for the rest of it. There's no great defense for I just don't feel like it, so it should die. If any of us said that about a puppy, we'd be monstrous. So, it doesn't make us any better when it's, a human
right.
baby.
And so from a biological perspective, there's really no argument that life and what life is, and a new life, a unique life, begins at conception. What that means for how people want to analyze that afterwards is for their own moral framework. But a unique life does start when the cells are reproducing, it has a sperm and an egg, that's a unique DNA code, and
at conception. Would you say, this actually is not lightening it up at all, but would you say that the reaction from feminists to your thread has been overwhelmingly positive and understanding and inclusive of you as a woman and empowering you as a woman to have your own view? Or do you feel like feminists have basically told you to shut your mouth?
Oh, I had to block a lot of people after that thread. Yeah. I would have liked to have the conversation with them, but I don't think many were willing to. So there were some that just reached out and just blankly, I don't understand what you're saying. And then we could have a little bit of a dialogue. Some messaged me and we did it through there. But for the ones that were just all out, this is war and I'm going to battle with this person because she's saying something that is not my ideology. There was no conversation to be had there. I think that the people that were most supportive on there were ones that were seeing it themselves, or had maybe some thoughts of their own about it, but hadn't really put it into words yet. Or they've already gone through this process and they said, yeah, I used to think that way too. And now that I'm 40 or 50, I see that it doesn't work out that way. Yeah. So.
And they're the real experts, honestly. They've lived through this whole period and they're at a point in their life where there is no turning back. I mean, I have a question for you. Why do you think that somebody would be so viscerally opposed to another person's feeling about something like this if they themselves were fully comfortable in their idea of feminism being so empowering?
It's a good question. I think a lot of people have a view of history that is a little bit off of reality, but they've been very much under this impression that women have been oppressed for all of history, and a lot of it came from religious oppression or dogma about how a woman had to be, and perhaps also they've never really seen a healthy relationship with a man in their life. So there might have been, I can't speak for everybody, but they might have also come from homes that were not so healthy. And so they've not only been fed an ideology of women have been oppressed, but they've also never really had a trust in a man ever. And so for them, I think I have a lot of empathy for where they're coming from, because their reality is a little bit warped. And not to say that their reality isn't real, it's just that when you're constantly told that men are against you, and perhaps also a man close in your life is not there to support you, you can come off thinking that any conversation about women and maybe them wanting a family or to be with a man in an intimate way that's going to support them through their life and they'll have a nice partnership with them, they don't trust that at all. And so there's a lot of defensiveness that comes out of them because they haven't seen it play out in their life, and they maybe haven't seen enough healthy interactions to counterbalance it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really interesting point. I kind of wonder how many, that makes me wonder how many women, if you were able to bear out the stats on this, like how many women end up more conservative who have present fathers versus
Absolutely.
Not. I would be really interested to see that.
Absolutely, or just their positive associations towards, masculine people.
Tendencies,
or men. Yeah.
I wonder how that's changed, her view of masculinity.
Oh yeah, how has your view of masculinity changed? And do you believe in toxic masculinity?
Man. So when I was growing up and the concept of being a strong, independent woman was just, bam, that's what you got to do in your life. The idea of a man being a protector and being somebody that you can lean on and will support you and help you with all the challenges in life, I didn't think that that was something that made me strong. I felt that that would make me weak if I did that. And so now I've sort of flipped the narrative in my head. It's a weird flip, but I see it more as strength, that you allow somebody into your life that you lean on and you trust in them and you've built something with them. And so you are giving up having to be independent and having to do everything for yourself. I find that to be a position out of fear and out of not willing to give into a partnership.
Right.
I agree. I think it's a fear mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a pressure on girls too to prove how smart they are. I mean, literally, you go to Target and it's like, I'm smart. I'm going to be a scientist. Like
on a shirt.
Nobody ever thought you didn't, and that's the approach I take. Like with my girls in particular, raising them is I never tell them all these, they can do anything a man can do, that they can be a scientist or they should be a mathematician or be great at,
Yep.
I don't, because it never occurred to them that they couldn't.
Yeah, that's the most damning thing to me about leftism, is that it's only to them that they feel like this.
Limited.
Our daughters have been raised with very conservative parents who know they can do anything, and they've never thought otherwise. So that's, I guess, the thing, the roadblock I have sometimes in trying to, I try to put myself in other people's shoes. And I have difficulty there because I'm not seeing the roadblocks. My daughters, when they want to do something, they're going to do it. Like they're very, what's the precocious, is that the right word? What's the word I'm searching for?
I mean, they're very self-confident.
They're very self-confident. They're very, if they want something, they're going to go grab it. They're going to get it. They're going to do it. They're going to do the work it takes. It's never occurred to them that they can't or that they shouldn't just because they're a girl. I think that mentality is something we actually see more often in communist countries where they devalue women, versus in places like the United States where we've been nothing but empowering in modern times.
Yeah, you guys seem to really have a good perspective on that. So that's good for those girls. The thing about, so there's two things. One is that the thing about, you're strong and this is, you're only going to be strong if you do this or that, or smart if you did this or that. I had a friend say to me once, and actually my boyfriend too, but you realize that you're good enough already. You don't have anything to prove. So that's something also that when you have an atheistic or progressive view of the world, you have to go and prove something by achieving some nebulous concept of breaking a glass ceiling or being some powerful, as you said, scientist in your coat on the cover of the magazine. And the way that you say that your girls are good enough or that they're smart enough, you don't have to keep nailing that in. That's I think what gets at that. You don't have anything to prove if girls already have value. And the other thing too that it makes me think about is how often people say when a girl talks about being a mom one day or carries her baby doll or something, well, you don't have to have children if you don't want to, right? Yeah. It's always this caveat that women will likely be fulfilled if they're mothers, but they don't have to have children.
All the time. I can't tell you, having two daughters, how many times I've heard at play dates other parents say that in conjunction with something about toys, and it always in my head I'm like, oh, I don't get it. Like if they were like dressed up as a doctor saying I want to be a doctor, none of us would say, well, you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to. Don't worry about being a doctor. Right. It's not the most important thing. You decide if you want to be a doctor when you grow up.
That's what I'm saying.
We would engage the curiosity and be like, this is really cute. They're thinking about being a doctor. With our daughters, one of our daughters specifically is very maternal. And the other one not as much, but she is, But one of them, you can just see now already that she's absolutely going to be a mom one day. There's no doubt about it. Like she's obsessed with babies, obsessed with kids. And she just loves them. She loves to just like hug them and kiss them and take care of them and put blankets on them and stuff. And you can just see that that's just an innate part of her. And I feel like if I tried to quash that, state of being that she already has naturally, I feel like that would be, anti-feminine. I'd be basically like trying to turn her against her natural female instinct that she has. Will both of my daughters have the same instincts? Maybe not. Our oldest daughter, she may want to, take more of a professional path in life or have a balanced, approach. But, I think we have to base our judgment more on individuals and less on demanding, what the left does is demand that everybody reach this certain arbitrary line that they say means you're a feminist. And that generally means you have to be pro-choice. You have to, you have to have this idea that masculinity is bad, and you have to be able to, say that you've had some sort of academic or work achievement. And couple that all together, and it generally, like all the people I know who have all these things, I've yet to meet one that's just so incredibly happy in real life. It's just not something I've come across in my anecdotal, experiences.
I would agree. But getting on what you said with how they play, the play that kids have is so important to what they're eventually going to do. They practice for what they're going to do in life. So things with the way the little girls draw is very different from the way boys draw. They're more likely to draw faces and families and flowers with faces, and boys are more likely to draw actions, and the perspective is them looking at, something moving. Yeah. And so their brains are just wired differently, even from a very young age. In monkeys, little girl monkeys will practice with little girl monkeys, female monkeys.
I like the little girl monkeys line. It sounded cuter.
The young.
That sounded cuter. I like it.
Mothers when they're mothers. And when you see a little girl walking around with a baby doll, and actually one of my family members' daughters, she's about 3, but she'll walk around breastfeeding her baby doll. She doesn't have breasts, but it's very cute. She's just practicing, right? And so I said to him, we had a conversation, because he said he can imagine people saying, oh, you don't have to do that with the baby doll, or you don't have to, giving her maybe a truck, like, hey, play with this, because people are trying to create a world where they do the exact same things. And I find that to be such a damaging way to look at children, because they are innately drawn to certain things. Their brains are just wired differently. And that doesn't mean one's better than the other, because that's the other thing. You start saying, hey, there are differences, and people assume that one is better than the other, that the way that boys are playing is better.
Right.
So that means that we have to make girls do boy things. And we're actually seeing the opposite too, that we're having people say that boys need to be doing all the girl things and putting them into tutus now. So that's the other thing that where it's going, where everybody has to be doing the same thing and pushing boys and girls to do activities that they're not drawn to.
I didn't plan on talking about the boy part of this, but I have to say something. I think that it's the most incredibly damaging thing to the next generation of children that we have when you couple these two things together. What they're doing to young boys is a travesty. Coming from California, we were in a class in California where our son was 5 years old. 2 of his classmates were already trans. Both had told, our son that they knew that they weren't really girls, but their moms wanted them to be girls. So that's why they're becoming girls. And same thing I hear over and over again. I know it sounds like it's like a trope at this point, but these boys, same thing, watched RuPaul's Drag Race with their mom. It's the same thing over and over again that I hear from all these different trans kids, is that they watched this show with their mom and they were validated by something. So, whether it's dressing up and then getting that validation by their parent doing a video of them or smiling at them or clapping for them, they're being validated by that. And at the end of the day, what young children want is their parents' validation, their parents to be proud of them, and their parents to love them. It's nothing but child abuse at this point. I'm so disturbed at this point by what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and how there's this, the rush is just so insane at this point that it seems like the insanity of yesterday has doubled by tomorrow, and it's continually happening, that rate of just turning over double day after day after day of it getting worse. I don't know where we're going to end up, and that's why I feel like, people who are sort of, younger like you and us, that we need to speak up in a lot of ways and be able to stand up and say, hey, look, we were a part of this ideology at one point, and we grew out of this by, searching out the truth, searching out the facts. Everything you've heard about who we are, and these sort of ideas and stereotypes that we're all like these old white, evangelicals that hate gay people and hate everybody, basically, that none of that is the case. That's not who we are. It's a very diverse group of people from all walks of life, all different racial backgrounds, all different backgrounds, just in every way possible. And I think that's why it's so important, so that young people can see that there's another path that is not requiring, 100% obedience all the time.
Right. It becomes the dichotomy of either you allow or you push. I'm going to use the word allow, even though I think that they're being pushed, but it's either the dichotomy of you allow kids to do anything that is self-expression to them, or you are pigeonholing them into a box that's a very confining box of they must do this exact thing or they're bad, right? So those two, they're pitching these two against each other, and that's not the dichotomy. There's a middle ground of, you know, accepting some of the innate characteristics that men and women have, or boys and girls have, and what they'll eventually want to do in their life, which it seems like we can't even say, hey, most boys will become fathers and probably be interested in things that they're going to do for work, and women will most likely be interested in work that relates to social groups and people, and they'll most likely be mothers.
Yeah, it seems like all general truths are now forbidden, you know, like anything that's a general truth. You know, if 80% of people, you know, who smoke get cancer, which is not the statistic, to be clear, but let's pretend it was, you know, saying that, people would be offended by you, you know, say, are you saying all people who smoke are going to get cancer? You know, they somehow find a way to take offense to everything, no matter how, you know, true it is.
It's interesting that a natural approach to looking at things, like for instance, parenting or children, you know, is so like vehemently against this idea of degenderization and social engineering that seems to be very prevalent, you know, with like child rearing and just families and everything in general. Like there's a concerted effort to socially engineer.
Yeah, I mean,
and negate, you know, actual genders and preferences, innate preferences that you see in children.
It seems like all of those things they demand that you never get into nuance, you know, they just want full obedience. Again, you know, like the rest of the ideologies like feminism and everything else on the left. But what I found is like, so in our own life, our son, you know, for instance, okay, I say all these things about how this, you know, sort of rush to attack masculinity is bad, and I've criticized how these parents have, you know, sort of, you know, I feel like they've baited a carrot in front of their kid's face with chocolate on it to, you know, like it's this reward sort of system to get them to get into this whole, you know, degendering system. In our case, for our son, there was a certain period of time, I think because he has an older sister, where when they played dress up, he would want to put a dress on. He did not want to be a girl when he put the dress on. It's just like he didn't want to be a cowboy for the rest of his life by putting the cowboy costume on. He would put it on real quick and was pretty disinterested within a minute, you know, but he would put it on for a minute and then take it off, you know, and then change something else. And it was because that was inside the costume closet and he saw his older sister wearing it all the time. So there is some nuance here that, like, you know, we've seen our son put a dress on when he was younger, and we didn't go, oh, honey, I think he's turning into a girl. We need to start the hormones and get him to a doctor to talk about his gender. And I think a lot of parents on the left, if their son that goes through that same experience, actually would at this point go, you know, like, are you feeling like a girl? You know, and as they're having this conversation, they don't realize they're giving attention to their kid, that then they're going to have this feedback loop of, you know, the kid is actually getting dopamine out of having this connection, you know, so is the kid going to do it again and again and again to get that same sort of release of positive endorphins from having that connection?
I don't think we talk enough about that. That's so big that if you give a positive affirmation to something that a kid is doing, so if they put that dress on and you say, wow, you look so cute in that, you look amazing, do you want to do a twirl like your sister? And then you have them do all these things and act this out. You're going to create a feedback loop, as you said. And it's what's interesting is that I think about a friend of mine who she grew up as a kind of more tomboyish kind of girl, and her mom, who did not have good relationships with men, and just assumed that her daughter was gay, which she wasn't. So she's not gay, she's married. But her mom had this big meeting with her at the school and said, honey, I know what you are, and it's okay, you can come out. And she said that was so psychologically damaging because she started questioning herself. Maybe I am gay. Maybe I do like girls. Maybe they know something I don't know. But meanwhile, she just wanted to play sports and do all of these things that were not in the box of what a typical, woman might do, even though she can be very feminine now. But she talked to me about how just placing something in a kid's brain like that can really affect them. She said it took her years to even consider this and break out and just say, no, that's actually not what I am. So to say that to a child, I can only imagine what a child must feel when they're 2 or 3 years old, as that one child was when he watched RuPaul's drag show, and he started wearing things around the house, and he's getting all of this positive feedback about it. So, I'm not sure why people aren't really thinking about the psychology behind all of this and how there's feedbacks that go on when parents are part of this.
I honestly feel like when people have kids, one of the things we need to start doing is at the hospital, have the doctor or the nurse go through a quick 30-minute psychological primer on children. Just like, hey, positive reinforcement leads to them, continuing those positive behaviors. You create feedback loops with your behavior that you enact on your children. So be careful what behaviors you display in front of them and what behaviors you react to or don't react to, because you're going to create a loop between your child and yourself on what behaviors they see gets your attention in negative or positive ways, and what things gets praise, what things don't, and they're going to, get into cycles of this. It'd be, I think remarkably helpful, at least if they got a book or something, but because I think it's incredible. You go through more trouble to adopt a dog than you do to bring home a kid from a hospital. That's one of the things I've never understood. When we had our first kid, which was almost 11 years ago now, we were at the hospital, and when she was going to be released, I was just like, that's it? You're just going to give us the baby? And we're supposed to keep it alive now? You didn't even give us a book or anything. Of course, Lena had read a million books already, and I had read half of one. But we went to a class, I learned CPR, I did all that stuff beforehand, which is a lot more than most parents do, but I was still shocked that they just hand you the baby, and they're like, hey, have a good life, see you later. It's crazy, you'd think there'd be at least a book that is required reading at the hospital before you get released.
You can't even adopt a dog without a home check now and a background check.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't have any domestic abuse issues, any of that. But
with the baby, it's just they're like, yep, take it, see you later.
Who would be in charge of coming up with the book?
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem.
Exactly, yes.
That's the problem, is that the
That's
book
so
would
true.
Inevitably be distorted into something horrifying. It would be, it would
So-
turn into a book that says,
Right.
your child is not a boy or a girl. It hasn't defined its own gender yet, so it's best to not use gendered words until your child's old enough to tell you if they're a boy or a girl. That's what it would turn into. Because there's just no common sense in these communities anymore, and it seems like those voices that are the loudest, even though they're not the majority, are the ones that all of the corporations are bowing down to, which is something that I still, I just don't understand. And I don't think I'll ever understand.
People are so afraid to not be seen as tolerant. And tolerant now this is where it gets into a little bit of people are so afraid to speak the truth because they don't want to be seen as mean. And because it's been pitted that if you say things that are kind of reality based, that it can be distorted to be mean, and somebody might distort it to be mean, that therefore you can't hold that view. Yeah. And it's so funny too, because the thing that you were describing with the tutu or the dress that your son put on, I think a lot of people imagine that people that view gender roles or traditional gender roles would scream at their son and say,
Right, exactly. Give him a big spanking.
That's a great point. I'm so happy you said that,
Oh
because
my
we
gosh.
had that conversation before that
you're a bad child. It would just be
Yeah.
culturally, you don't wear dresses, but you wear these other things.
I'm so glad you said that, because it's something that I should have, added onto it, is that that's something that her and I actually talked about, Landon and I talked about when our son did that, is we were like, I bet you people on the left think that this is the type of thing that like conservative parents are like screaming at their kids over.
Giving them a spanking.
And are like giving them a spanking or something over it. It's like, no, we're very like rational people. Our kids are having fun during playtime. We're just not giving a feedback loop of attention for it. You know, we're not creating a world where that's gonna get you some sort of positive reinforcement. It's just something you did for a minute that you're not taking very seriously. You know, if he came to us and told us he wanted to wear a dress to a store and leave the house wearing girls' clothes, it'd be a different conversation where we talk to him and we tell him that, you know, that's not something that we feel like is best for him at this point, and that he needs to, you know, basically like talk through
pick
why.
Pick
another outfit, but talk through why at some point when it's healthy to talk through it.
And parents should set healthy boundaries. I mean, you know what's best. Should.
Yeah.
You know, and you see more of the long term,
Yeah.
You have perspective. And so they might not understand, well, what's the big deal if I wear this? And it's not a huge deal, but it's, you know, you don't want them to go into the world in a way that's damaging to them. Yeah. And can confuse them, right?
It's the same thing as them not wanting to wear a coat outside when it's 10 degrees.
Yeah,
you know?
So I think there's so much nuance there that just gets lost in this, and I don't know. I'm not sure why either. But I think it does come back to the fear of being seen as mean. If somebody can claim that you're being mean to them, and that's where we are.
Yep, exactly. So we had one more question for you. What advice do you wish you were given, or would you like to give girls who might be listening today?
I like to reframe that question in my mind as, what do I wish that I knew? Because I don't know that I have the best advice to offer anybody. It's just, this was my life. This was things that I noticed. And so if some things can be gleaned that help them, then that's cool. But I don't know that I have the best advice necessarily. I would say work on yourself as the most important thing when you're young, because whether or not you know it, you carry some type of baggage from the way that you were raised. And getting true to who you are first before you enter into a relationship, especially a one that involves sex and emotions, and if you are not dating for marriage at that point, it's really hard to know who you are and what your values are if you're mixing it up in a relationship. So the time that you spend young figuring out yourself first is really important to carry you through that, and you're still going to evolve as you go through your 20s and 30s. And I'm still learning about myself, of course. And I would say too that once you decide what you want, time goes really fast. So it's not, I was definitely raised with, you'll have time for everything. You'll have time to do that one day. You'll have time for kids one day. And you kind of wake up going, where the heck did all the time go? Definitely. So if you don't, you have to choose what you prioritize in your life. And I definitely prioritize my career and my school and my work way more than I did the relationships in my life. And particularly one where I was engaged, and I broke off the engagement while I was in graduate school because it was just too stressful. So there were things that I could have prioritized better had I known how fast things go. And so it's not, we are on a timeline. If you want kids, if you want to have a family, then it's okay to prioritize a relationship at a certain point in your life, and prioritize a career if you choose to do that at a different point in your life. But you have to think very carefully about where those things come in, because they can't always necessarily exist on the same exact timeline at the same exact place in the timeline. Yeah. Sometimes it does take a few years to, have your kids and raise them the way you want before doing something else. And a lot of women do choose to be home with them, especially when they're really young. So, I guess I would just want girls to realize that if you do want to stay at home with your kids, that's a very healthy thing for them. It's very healthy for you. You get healthy feedback from children and from nurturing them. And so that's healthy for you. It's healthy for your kids. It's healthy for society too, because society needs healthy people. So that's okay. And
I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that I didn't ask yet that I did want to ask is just on a personal level, could you identify what your largest growth moment was in terms of this evolution from being a feminist in a liberal family to becoming a more conservative woman who is at odds with modern feminism?
Growth moment. Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that there were moments in my life where something clicked in a moment, right? So you hear something and, oh man, that really clicked for me. There were also times, the time that I think I noticed something wasn't right was while I was doing my PhD and was so stressed out trying to do the work there. And that is what prompted the thread that I wrote.
Yeah.
But things weren't adding up with the choices that women around me were making once they reached late 20s, 30s, and what I had been told when I was young of us all being equal and doing the exact same thing. And so there was a discrepancy there with what I was seeing from stressed out moms and the choices that they were making with pulling back and spending time with kids versus the narrative that was in place when I was growing up. There were other moments too, but I would say that that was kind of a big growth period where I eventually decided to leave the program and, really figure out what it was that I wanted.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on today. We really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope that this is really educational and just something that can connect with a lot of young women and young men, because I think it's important for men.
I do
women
too,
to have this
and I hope that we can regain balance somewhere in this, because I think the pendulum does tend to swing too far one way or another, but it's swung really far, and I do hope that women and men and people and all people can just realize that there's balance to be gained there. So that's just my hope.
I agree 100%.
We're one conversation closer to that point.
Yep. It gives me a little bit of hope to meet people like you two that are very similar to us, and are in our age group, and that we're identifying the same things, and that it kind of validates that sometimes you're being gaslit by the left, and it's nice when you're able to form communities of people that are around your age and are very well educated and cultured and everything, that they're finding the same things that you've found. There's something about that that's just it's a little comforting, so it's always nice to meet people like you. And I'm just so glad you're using your voice, because there's so many people like us and like you who are still silent even though they feel the way we do, because they're afraid of what retribution there may be or what people may say negative things about them. So I admire you speaking out, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I totally agree that it's so nice to connect with people that are seeing these things and speaking out about them, because we truly need that to have a nice, well-rounded conversation in society today. So I really appreciate connecting with you and for the opportunity to come on and talk to you. It's really good what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Can you tell people where they can read more of your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter right now. So my handle is Rachel Bock 9, BOCK. And I hope to have some book out early next year. So
awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
I look forward to meeting you in person in the future too.
Bye.